Okay, I'd like to call what is today, the March 11th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. You'll all have to forgive me because I haven't done this for quite a few months, if not years, but I used to do it. The first order of business is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes as presented?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, second. Motion and second. All in favor of approval, say aye.
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 The next item of business is a 15-minute time period for public comment. It's a time when the public can make comments on any topic which is not a topic which is before the commission or is likely to become a topic for the commission. Is there anyone? Okay. Those of you who might be watching on television, keep in mind this is a chance to communicate with the commission. So keep that in mind. The next item on our agenda is final subdivision plat for the parcel on Nursery Street. Mike, go ahead.
Thank you. So this is the final plat for the Paradise View addition. And as you recall, it was about an 1.5 acre parcel on the corner of Palouse River Drive, Nursery Street, and Powers Avenue. This photo is about a year, maybe year and a half old. So Palouse Prairie Charter School has actually been constructed on this piece here, and the infrastructure for Southview has been extended, and they've started to build some homes along Southview as well. And this is the Campus Crest, the Grove student housing development here to the west of this property, and then primarily just commercial properties to the south of Palouse River Drive. Just a closer aerial view of the property. Nursery Powers and Palouse River Drive, gaining elevation as you head north on Nursery Street. So just to recap, in June 26th of last year, the commission did conduct a public hearing, considered the request. It was for the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust, Nils Peterson, subdividing the 1.5 acre parcel located on Nursery Street. So the proposal was 17 parcels. They ranged in size from a little over 1,800 square feet to a little over 5,000 square feet in size. There are 12 twin home lots proposed, 4 townhouse lots, and 1 single family lot as part of this proposed subdivision. There's also a public alley that extends east-west through the center of the parcel. And then there was an existing stormwater detention pond located in the southeast corner that's part of the plat as well. The commission recommended approval, the preliminary plat with no conditions. And then it was advanced on to City Council, and they conducted a public hearing. And that happened August 19th of last year, and they approved the plat, or the preliminary plat with no conditions. So just to take a look at the final plat that was submitted, really not a whole lot's changed. I think there's a slight modification to some of the property lines for the townhouse parcels here in order to get a little bit better of a design and have those fit a little bit better on those parcels. So, once again, these are the townhouse lots. Those will face Nursery Street. And then these are all twin home lots here, facing Palouse River Drive. Here's the stormwater detention parcel here on the southeast. Here's the alley that extends through. It ends up going dead ending here to the east of the property line, and then ends up heading due north, kind of a T intersection there, and goes up to Powers Avenue, just adjacent to the cul-de-sac. These are 4 more twin home parcels. And these are twin home parcels as well, and this is the single family parcel in the northwest corner there. So just a closer view. And so internally, we've reviewed the final plat for conformance with city and state code requirements, found it to be in conformance, and recommending that the commission recommend approval to city council. And I'd certainly be able to answer any questions you have.
So are there any questions, Mike?
That whole swoopy thing's an alley that goes like this.
It is,
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. It just looked weird. I wanted to make sure what I was
Yeah,
looking at.
well, it's primarily because of topography on the piece, so.
Oh, I
they had
gotcha.
to- Yeah, a certain grade had to do this design, and had to continue on.
No, any comments?
No, thank you for asking.
Thought it looked great
Motion?
last time, and I think it looks great this time. So I would recommend approval. Motion
Second?
to
I
approve.
missed this. I don't,
I'll second.
I was in.
Okay, we have a
I
motion
wasn't here either.
and
Yeah,
a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I-
Congratulations, Nels. Thanks for coming. The next item of business is the planned unit development, final subdivision plat of Indian Hills East Edition. Here, Mike?
Yeah, this is the proposal we heard last year from Bloom Enterprises. This is located on 1330 Indian Hills Drive, referred to as Indian Hills East Edition. They had a final plat and a final PUD request. And so this was the property, Indian Hills Drive, got Mountain View Road north-south here. This is the USDA office building. This is a multifamily development that's developed in more of a townhome fashion. And then there's, Blooms are currently developing apartment complexes. I believe they have 4 buildings currently constructed on this piece, and are starting another. And then this is a single-family neighborhood here. This is Indian Hills 6th Edition to the west, which includes Alturas Drive, Pony Place. Further to the west here is Blaine Street. You've got agricultural land to the south as well as to the east, and then this is, of course, Alturas Technology Park to the north. So just a closer view, you can see, you'll see in a minute, but the proposed plat and PUD ends up utilizing the travel lane in this development here to the west, which is also owned by the Blooms. And those are the townhouse configuration of multifamily houses there. So back in May of last year, the commission conducted a public hearing, and it was for the subdivision PUD. And so this property is a little under an acre in size, 1330 Indian Hills Drive. So the proposal was for 10 rather smallish single-family lots. Those range from a little over 2,600 square feet to a little over 3,900 square feet in size. And then the commission recommended approval with the PUD and approval of preliminary plat with 2 conditions. So the 2 conditions on the preliminary plat was that the construction of the proposed private street shall meet current city standards, including dedicating easements for public and franchise utilities. And then the detention pond, which was partially on the property to the west, meet Moscow stormwater runoff control standards. So that was recommended to City Council, and then the council conducted a public hearing, occurred June 17th of last year, and they approved the Indian Hills East Edition PUD and preliminary plat with the same 2 conditions. So this would be the final plat that was submitted, and they have satisfied those 2 conditions. So you can see Indian Hills Drive, so this would be the private street that's platted. The 10 lots, 5 on each side, ends up hanging a left here at the northern portion of the property, and ends up going into the other property here to the west. And you can see there's an access easement that gives them permission to access the drive aisle around the west side of the townhouse development. There's also the stormwater detention pond that was in the southwest corner. That's shown here in an easement as well.
So on that adjacent property, that's also a private drive?
It's also a private drive,
Yeah,
yep.
so it just connects, it's kind of a U-shaped deal.
Yeah, it'll just end up looping around. I believe it's, I don't know if they have it designated as one-way here, but it's wide enough for two-way traffic. So they can go either direction, but yeah, it ends up, looping around this development, and this will end up going through here and looping around here, but I believe you can still exit on this drive aisle as well. So this is the PUD that was submitted. You can see there's more detail with the building footprints. So there's, driveways that access the different houses. Kind of a smaller footprint for the homes. Then the drive aisle that heads north and then hangs to the west there. And then a little more detail on the stormwater detention pond here to the west. There is a type A landscape buffer that's required on the east side here. And there's really been no change for the design that was shown in the preliminary PUD as far as the home design. So once again, staff's reviewed the final plat and final PUD for compliance with city and state code requirements, found it to be in conformance, and we recommend the commission recommend approval to city council with no conditions.
Okay, question.
Sure.
On the landscaping on the east side, I thought we said that we did not require that because the landscaping from the ag building covered the ground, and then that leaves them more backyard. My memory says that.
I think we still talked about requiring the buffer on the east. It was just discussions on the west side about any type of landscaping over there, and that there was already landscaping on the east side of the drive aisle.
Well, I remember that, because if that's all landscaping, those squiggly lines, they don't have any backyard.
Yeah, well, I mean, they can locate them closer to the property line. Type A landscape buffer is not a whole lot. It's 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs every 100 feet. So I believe that's about 150 feet in depth there. So it's not going to be a whole lot of plantings, maybe a tree and a shrub or two in each backyard. So it won't be dense
I
at all.
remember we had quite a discussion on it.
Yeah.
And that together, right over the property line has the landscaping for the ag building, so
Mhm.
we didn't want to give them any undue hardship there.
Sure.
Other questions, comments?
So what's the, remind me what the, I suppose, rationale for the private street? What does it allow them to do?
The PUD,
I realize it's a
Development.
PUD, but just bring my little old mind up to speed.
Well, it allows a lot narrower of a street
Yeah.
than would typically be required. It just allows for a
Sure,
sidewalk
there'd
on
be
one
a
side of the street.
60-foot right-of-way if we had, yeah.
At least, yeah. So,
And-
and there'd be like a 28-foot wide street.
And do we have experience with how there won't be a lot of traffic on this street, obviously, so it isn't going to get pounded. But do we have experience with other private streets and over time?
Yeah, I mean, we have relatively new PUDs. Rich has Green Acres, Tiempo Commons, Camden Court. There's a lot of them on White Avenue, in close proximity to the roundabout. One of the advantages, I guess, for the city is that all the, maintenance in the future ends up being from the private property owners and not
Right.
necessarily the city. So that, and you can get a lot narrower of a roadway, so there's a lot less maintenance cost just because you're not, having to care for that width of pavement over time. But as far as lifespan of private roads, I mean, it'd be similar to that of a public road, but we don't have PUDs that are reaching that age where it's
Yeah,
time to,
yeah.
I mean, I think most of them are still in really good shape as far as the roadway, so.
Yeah. But I totally follow your train of thought, especially with our conversation about shorter blocks and that sort of thing. I think that there should, I'd like to see where the city does allow some narrower streets
Mhm.
and start.
Yeah, we've
Make
talked
things
about,
make a lot more
I
sense,
think
in my
you can see that the properties are smaller. So in a sense, it's, even though Nels is gone, it fits into a more affordable
Yeah.
property, which I
Yeah, that was
think
the
is-
exciting thing about this, that it was
is
affordable
the
housing.
is a positive in terms of
And I was going to mention that one of the things I'll talk about later in the meeting is the fact that the Transportation Commission is talking about some changes in street standards that would allow in certain conditions narrower streets. So,
Bill Morshak should be here. I'm going back in 30 years, or 25 years, but Morshak used to talk about, as a real estate developer, he was dreaming that we could have streets that are less big and less, just to make things more saleable. And
other questions from Mike?
get him a
at this
cup of
point?
coffee and tell him that we've got one now.
Any questions from the... Okay, I would entertain a motion for...
I would recommend approval of this.
Well,
and-
and keep in mind, we're, I believe, recommending approval to council,
Council,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Recommend approval to council then, with no conditions. 'Cause the
Second.
Well,
conditions have been met, is what Mike said.
okay. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. And you can stay.
Thanks.
Okay, item number 5 on our agenda is the final draft of the subdivision code, which we're reviewing. So Mike?
So this was based upon the recommendations that we had discussed last time, kind of the two changes when we talked about lot division process. We had gone kind of back and forth between the subcommittee's recommendation with 4 lots and our commission's and staff's recommendation of just allowing 1 additional lot. And so we talked a little bit about that more in depth last time, and I think the commission was comfortable with allowing up to 4 as long as there's no street right-of-way extension. And everything, I guess, outside of that would be a subdivision plat. What we had, so the language that we had come up with was that, allow 4 additional lots for sale, use, or development. Division of property where the proposed division requires the extension of a public street right-of-way shall be processed as a subdivision in accordance with section 1-3 of this code. And then clarifying that minor right-of-way dedications such as the dedication of additional property to accommodate the widening of public street in accordance with adopted street standards shall not be considered the extension of a public street right-of-way for the purposes of this section. So this was a slight deviation from what I think we talked about last time. This was just in talking about this internally. I think last time we had arrived at allowing 4, but then allowing 1 additional if there's a street extension. And we can certainly talk a little bit more about that, but just internally, I think we'd be more comfortable with just keeping it clear as far as anything that requires a street extension, you just have to go through the subdivision plat process. I mean, it's hard to imagine a scenario where you're just taking a lot and creating 1 additional lot and having to extend a street right away in some fashion. So that, that was our train of thought, as well as, just not, as far as the record of the city and not wanting to have a subdivision with a street dedicated and then have that record of survey blank spot for a street right away and then have an additional subdivision maybe beyond that. And so that was, I think, what we thought was good as far as the language, but
I was a bit startled when I read it, and then the more I thought about it, I thought it was a excellent idea, the way you've proposed it.
I mean, I think that'll give people quite a bit of flexibility to just do administrative for the 4, and then if it does require the street extension, then we'd just go through the subdivision plat process, so.
Other thoughts?
But yeah, trying to clarify that, a lot of these, sometimes as we know, if there's a lot division and the street's not up to current standards, sometimes there's an additional right-of-way dedication of 5-10 feet. So for instance, like the trail, road, like property that was in the subdivision in the area of city impact, that was kind of an example. So just wanted to make sure that that wasn't going to get captured in a subdivision plat, and that's why we ended up with the language at the end about the, minor right-of-way dedications aren't considered the extension of a street right-of-way, so. And then clarifying for subdivisions, so we currently have subdivisions with a division of land that results in the creation of no more than 4 additional lots for sale, use, or development, or any division that includes the extension of a public street right-of-way. And then the other portion of this was the discussion about the parkland dedication. So we proposed to take out commercial zoning districts as part of the parkland dedication requirements. And the thought that, where we were coming from as far as staff's perspective was that, parkland dedication is intended to serve population of residents, and commercial services don't necessarily provide additional population. It's apartments and houses and, pretty much dwellings that create the need for parkland dedication. But we do allow residential development in most of the commercial zones. So we went back to a couple code amendments back in, it was the early 2000s, I believe, where we used to have just language about residential development if it's developed on commercially zoned land. And we consulted with our legal department about just requiring parkland dedication for commercial uses. And there really has to be kind of that nexus between the law that you impose and pretty much there has to be a legal connection between requiring parkland dedication and serving a governmental need. So if there's no residential use on that commercial property, then there's really no connection between requiring parkland, because there's no generation of population to warrant additional parkland. So we came up with this language about, so we added the commercial zoning districts back in, and so it'd be the 12% because it would be similar to an R4 zone where you could develop apartment, kind of highest and best use. You could typically develop apartment complexes on any of these commercial zoning districts. And so we added that in, added 12%, and then the sentence below that states that parkland dedication with commercial zoning districts is intended to meet the demand that results from the development of residential uses upon commercially zoned land and mitigate the effects of such subdivision development on the ability of the city to deliver services without compromising quality of service delivery, imposing substantial additional cost upon the city residents to accommodate the proposed subdivision. As of the time of the application for subdivision development, no fee or dedication shall be required if the commercial zone land is exclusively developed for non-residential use. All subdivisions that contain commercially zoned land shall enter into a development agreement with the city providing for the future dedication of parkland or payments in lieu of dedication should the commercial zoned land be developed for residential use. Any future required parkland dedication or payments in lieu of parkland dedication shall be required prior to the issuance of building permits for residential structures upon the commercially zoned land. The amount of land to be dedicated shall be that which was required at the time of subdivision approval, may be prorated based upon the percentage of commercially zoned land that is developed for residential use.
Questions or comments? I was again startled when I read this and sort of remembered some of the nexus comments that staff has made with respect to some other things that, it'd be nice to be able to rely on commercial property as a sort of a cash box for all sorts of things, sewers, water infrastructure, and so on. But with sewers and water, one does have a nexus to some degree. But demonstrating the nexus between parkland and commercial development is a bit harder. You made the comment at the last meeting about commercial development.
Yeah, I guess I didn't realize
But
that
that's problematic.
Yeah,
as
it is
I-
problematic, I can see, yeah.
As I remember some of the
yeah.
discussions that we've had
Yeah.
in this commission before.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is, but I think this is about as far as we can go as, I think it captures what we can capture as far as legally.
If it's used for,
Yeah.
how often do people use commercial property for residential though?
Quite
Does that ever happen?
now that, since we changed the code
Oh, yeah.
and allowed more flexibility there, it actually happens quite a bit.
Is it okay?
Because they'll see
Like
that.
what were these zoned, like both these that we saw tonight, what were they zoned? Do you know?
They're zoned actually,
Do you- I was
well,
just wondering if
the
you
one
knew.
in the one in nursery is R4.
Okay.
But,
I'm just curious more.
but Knowles is RO,
Is
actually.
it? Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I was wondering, yeah.
So, actually, RO is technically a commercial zone, but it's pretty much the same thing as R4.
Right.
And
yeah.
so you have quite a bit of RO just because it offers flexibility to go more, commercial or residential.
Yeah.
So that's one that we probably, it's a good thing that we, captured at least that zone. Neighborhood business the same way. Usually you have little pockets of neighborhood business and they'll, want to put some commercial on the bottom and maybe a couple apartments up top type of thing. We have a lot of, it just, as you know, it's a lot cheaper to build up than it is out. And so, Stacks Building, that would kind of be an example. That's central business. But they have residential apartments, above 2 stories
Right.
of the Stacks Building. So, actually, we're seeing it quite a bit. We used to have quite a bit of inquiries about it just when people were doing projects, and a number of years ago, we ended up just loosening up those regulations just to allow more residential and commercial zones.
Yeah.
And we've actually, seen quite a few people utilizing that now.
I think
that
that's
we can
good.
do it. It was always one of those fights that where it was just easier to, if that's what everybody wants to do, at some point, you got to let them do it, right? It's just
Well,
kind
it
of
makes
the
sense.
market's
If
driving
it's a-
it. And it
if it's a bad
and
argument.
it makes sense to provide, affordable housing
Right.
and different living opportunities close to downtown and other commercial areas. So, it makes a lot of sense, so.
I am reminded of East A Street, where when the East A Street originally was developed, the developers and the Planning and Zoning Commission all thought that it was going to be a commercial strip. I think we have one professional office and a couple of other offices, but it's almost totally residential.
Yeah,
And,
zone motor business, I think with the intention of doing that, and
Yes.
then everybody went through PUDs in order to have residential apartments on there, so.
Other comments? And those are the two major changes.
Yeah.
Other things that people caught in looking over the draft?
So, and just to recap on the parkland stuff, like as far as I lost it, but like you had 12% on, are you just looking at stuff up there?
Yeah.
Is that what you've just seen on other areas? How did you come up with those percentages? That's what I was just wondering.
12% was primarily just based upon the R4 zone, because a lot of times in those commercial zones, you're gonna have apartments above commercial.
Right.
Which
Yep.
is what's typically required, so like, if you're in central business or general business, you're required to still have commercial on the ground floor. So typically what happens is you have commercial on the ground floor, and then you have apartments above.
Yeah.
And that's the typical scenario, and that's why I just mimicked the 12%.
I was just wondering if, like even on the R4, like how you came up with 12%? Is that is that something?
It was, yeah, I mean, when we adjusted the percentages, it was based upon population density that you typically, can
Okay.
achieve through our zoning code.
I just see it's up quite a bit from where it was before, and I was
Yeah.
just curious how.
Well, we've
how you came up
adjusted
to it.
everything, so like
Yeah.
ag, forest, and farm ranch, I mean, that used to be, I think, around 5% or so.
Yeah.
And then, same with suburban residential, that's 1%, and that was probably around the same,
It was
5-6%.
yeah.
So we've mainly just adjusted it based upon the number of dwellings that you can get, based upon our minimum lot sizes and minimum lot widths. So that's why we adjusted it like that.
Is that like, is it in tune with what other people are doing though? I'm just curious.
Sure. Yeah.
If it's,
Yep.
just if, most places, nobody ever goes over 7 and we're doing 12, I'm just want to make sure we're in tune a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, and there is discussion that much of Moscow is below some generally accepted standards for available parkland.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, it really varies. A lot of other communities impose impact fees for parkland. So it's mainly just a, impact fee based upon how large the subdivision is. And they don't actually dedicate land. They just
Right.
pay into the city to purchase land. So, but we don't do that.
although we allow it.
It's allowed,
We allow
yeah, I mean, it's allowed.
Fee in place
yeah,
of
yeah.
dedication.
Sure.
Okay, I assume our possibility here is to send it for public hearing?
Yeah, that's my goal. I was thinking, I think the earliest meeting we can hit with our public notice requirements is gonna be April 8th.
Okay,
So that's
is
not
there?
next meeting, the meeting after. So what I'd propose is, I haven't filled out the whereas statement, so I'll get that done. And then one final review next meeting, and then in the meantime, go ahead and schedule it for public hearing April 8th, and we can conduct the meeting then.
Okay, is there consensus that we're ready for that? Okay, we're moving along very expeditiously here. And I believe the next item of discussion is commission budget. We do have, I believe, a sheet of paper here which indicates that, I guess, that our budget last year was 1,500, and I don't believe we've spent very much of that.
Did we spend it?
We never really spend, yeah, it usually gets spent on new name plaques for new commissioners and cards and gift certificates for outgoing commissioners. Is usually what it,
We didn't-
Or
gets
it
spent
gets spent on
Workshops.
workshops and education.
yeah. Yeah, if anything like that comes up, I mean, that's really what it's intended to fund, is some type of professional development for commission members. There were, yeah, in the past, it wasn't this last year, it was the year before. or it may have been last year, when we conducted, we had the mini conference here in Moscow. And I know that for Idaho APA, American Planning Association, it was up at the 1912 Center, and I know a number of people, a number of commissioners ended up attending that, and that paid for the registration fees for the day of sessions. And so, yeah, if we have training opportunities, there's a number of conferences throughout the state every year. If somebody has an interest in that, that could go towards funding, sending, one or two commissioners to a planning training event.
I believe that on my bookshelf at home, I have a planning book which was distributed to all members, presumably using that budget, and that, of course, remains a possibility.
So did Mr. Beebe
So-
get a planning book? Did you give him one?
Well, we've shifted to a thumb drive now.
I admit,
used to get
mine
big
is,
I'm sure, yeah.
mine is at least 2.5 inches thick.
Yeah, exactly. Same with mine. Three-ring binder, big. Now you get a little thing in your pocket that you
There's
lose.
still just as much info.
We've gone green.
And
Okay,
probably easier to access
Navigate,
in a
probably,
way,
yeah.
Is there a motion? Is 1,500 appropriate? I would entertain a motion.
Oh, you want a motion? Just says further, I'm sorry. Just say approve, yep. Okay, recommend we approve the $1,500 budget request.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the one remaining item on our agenda is a Transportation Commission meeting, and I've already indicated one of the major items of discussion that's before us. I should say that the Transportation Commission will be meeting in this room at 4 o'clock tomorrow. The Commission will be discussing street standards with the possibility of, under certain conditions, with presumably lower anticipated traffic and not arterials and so on, under certain conditions, narrower street profile. The other item of discussion is a further discussion of stop sign issues. Stop signs were proposed under the proposal for 3rd Street redesign. The proposal for a stop sign at 3rd and Hayes and 3rd and Blaine. The current city standards for placement of stop signs suggest that they're not warranted there, and there will be further discussion of that point. Other items for discussion? Other,
I do have an opinion about
this should be a
Stop sign
record.
isn't warranted on 3rd and Hayes?
Oh, four-way is not warranted.
Oh.
Four-way. Currently there is two-way.
when you come on
Or Dale's.
6, when you turn on to Hayes, then you can rip till D.
Yeah.
So you get a little bit of manly driving, and maybe womanly as well.
Exactly.
Going across, because you don't have to stop till D, and then so it seems like there's a lot of indecision about that corner. You get quite a few people either slowing down on Hayes, thinking it must be a four-way stop, or.
I've actually stopped there before. I wasn't gonna admit that, but
Yeah, I have stopped there.
I've actually stopped there before.
When I'm on autopilot,
Yeah, autopilot, yeah.
Because
Exactly.
we have several, we have stops down on Blaine and Sixth. So
Yeah.
there's a kind of a repetitive feeling. And
but we're good drivers. There have not been any recorded accidents in the last 5 years there. And there would have been, of course, no pedestrian vehicle accidents there in the
it's
last
true
5 years.
that it's been several years since we've had a couple of cars that get hit and roll over on it, but when you've lived in a place 40 years, you've seen stuff come and go. And I don't think we've had one in quite a while.
Yeah, but
to be honest with you.
there has
So
not been.
It's fair to say that Third Street is more walked probably than either Sixth or D, just because of the
Topography,
concentration of apartments.
Yeah,
And with
topography.
the concentration of apartments and the park,
Yeah.
dogs have just become really popular with people. It seems to me that they've become more popular in the last 20 years. And so walking your dogs across the street and all that with the park, I think there'd be a reason to argue that a stop sign wouldn't be bad at Moscow's most wonderful city park. Wouldn't be a bad idea, but it isn't going to change my life a lot. There's still 5,000 cars come by every day, so you just get used to it.
Well, the city has put in stop signs a couple of places before if they decide that the city council, if they decide that it's warranted, they think it's warranted, they can do it.
Well, in response to some of the stop sign discussion on First Street, I believe, the city developed some formal standards. And these are the formal standards that currently indicate that the four-way is not required at that point. And we will be discussing those formal standards tomorrow.
I think with all the corners in Moscow, the time of day is critical. Sometimes you can drive through Fort Russell at 11 or at 2 and think, what? And then if you drive through at 3:15, it's a whole different world. And it bunches up for a short period of time. And I notice I don't plan my life very well, and so every now and then I come out of my basement thinking, oh, I think I better go to town. And if you're going to town at 3:15, that's a really bad choice.
Any other items of discussion before I call for an adjournment? We are adjourned.